morning. Thank you all for being here. Welcome to our fourth Future Stand of the year. It's going to be a good one. You're in for a treat, so thanks for coming. Just quickly, a couple of housekeeping measures. So first of all, we've got a multicultural performance happening straight after this. So that means at 10:30, I'll remind you, just at the end, we just need to pack up all the chairs basically to the end, but I'll remind you at the end of the session. Another thing to note is we have a few friends of the museum today. So a very big warm welcome to our whānau of Auckland Live. Sorry, I've got them all written down. Can't remember them. Auckland Live, Maritime Museum, RFA, the Navy Museum, and Auckland Art Gallery. Thank you all. Welcome. So our guest speaker is none other than Seb Chan. He hardly needs an introduction, but I'll give him one anyway. He's the Chief Experience Officer at the Australian Centre for the Moving Image, ACMI, in Melbourne. Previously, he was the Director of Digital and Emerging Media at the Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum in New York. And he was instrumental in transforming the museum into a highly renowned interactive hotspot it is today. I'm sure you're all well aware of the Hewitt pen. It's something that comes up in every digital brief that we have at museums.
Sorry.
Prior to New York, Seb was also head of digital, social and emerging technologies at the Powerhouse Museum, working alongside Tim Hart in Sydney. And he's a regular guest speaker at digital and cultural sector conferences around the globe. Seb's a bit of a future same stuff for us. He's kind of the Gene Simmons of the glam sector. This format of the session is a little bit different. We're actually going to go toe-to-toe and have some mud wrestling.
Which though, right?
Actually, Ben, sorry, we couldn't get the mud in, unfortunately. So we're just going to have to talk about emerging digital technology, something like that, some trends. Cool. So I'll let him take it away. Welcome to Tim Hart and Seb Chan. Cheers.
So what are we going to do, Tim? Don't know. Right. So let me start the fire first. This works. Alright. This works. Yes. We got a scoop.
We thought a fireside chat might be good.
Yeah, we thought this would be a good thing to do, but it never works. No, it's not working now. This is just all the time. Okay. How annoying. Oh, well, that's all right. Well, maybe I'll just take some slides. So, we were just going to talk about some stuff, right? So this is when I worked with Tim, like years ago, in 2001, working at Powerhouse. This is just before Tim left, actually, isn't it? Yeah, so we were doing a bunch of... this is when we were doing a project putting the museum's collection up on the web, and it was a complete failure then. But we did these panoramas, and this is one of the hidden things. If you clicked a couple of times, so the whole collection, the collection browser, the highlights of the collection was built in Flash, which was kind of dumb. But it looked good at the time, and it had, I think, 50 things in it. Because we thought that putting collection up on the web was putting the highlights up. But then in 2006, we started putting all the collection up. That was after Tim left. Put all the collection up and did all this sort of stuff. Social tagging and recommendations and all that sort of stuff. And then the API in 2008 and all of that sort of stuff kick-started a lot of things in the museum world. I think around open access and the idea that putting a whole collection up was actually probably a good thing. Previously, also there'd been social tagging, but it had been in arts museums and not really in museums with diverse collections like the Powerhouse. And a lot of stuff that we learned from that was that when you put art collections up on the web, it's very different to when you put the stuff that people find in their shed up on the web. And so at the Powerhouse, we had such an enormous collection that a lot of the times when we had this stuff up, people would find things in their shed and email the museum or call up their curator, and it was quite a different experience. And I think that sort of sense of opening up the collection when that collection is part of everyday life for most people and is sold on eBay, it really is a very different relationship with the community, and it was one I don't think that was sustainable. But one of the things that I really wanted to do that we didn't do was to set up an eBay pricing bot that would just run over these pages and tell you what the, because everybody would just say, hey, I found this thing in my shed. What's it worth? And what if the eBay price was just up there? Museum ethics and all of that. Can't really do that. But that sort of thing was seemed like a very sensible thing. So anyway, there was that. So the API then went to the Hewitt in New York for 4 years. They had just closed when I arrived there, and Fast Company did an interesting long interview with Bill Moggridge, the then director, and the journalist put this kind of mean quote in the article, which was actually really great because it really set the scene for how hard that museum was. It was in an old mansion house on the Upper Eastern Side. The average age, or the average profile of the visitor was a 55-year-old white woman, very high earning or very high family income, like very high. It's the Upper East Side, and lived within two miles of the building. So this is the Smithsonian National Design Museum. Slate actually just published a piece two weeks ago, I think, that evaluated the museum as a example of change, and the average age now is 27. So pretty significant change, because this was what the challenge was in 2011, and it was a very small building, so the collection stored off site. Very small amounts of it digitised. So when I started, only 10,000 images on the website. When I left, it was 95% done, and finished about 6 months later. So entire collection digitised, all the collection up online, all the people up online, colour search, all the different facets of navigating that, showing things that can connect it to other museums, so back to the Powerhouse collection, MoMA's collection and others. And that was really the job was about this. It was about changing the museum floor, the museum experience itself, changing who came to the museum. So the museum became an interface for the digital rather than the other way around, which I think is what we were all doing in the 2000s, building these web-based collection searches as an alternative to come to the museum, forgetting that if everybody who came to the museum actually went to the website when they went home, what would that do? So the Could Be Hewitt was kind of about that, and it was about working from this premise that what if the Smithsonian Design Museum's collection by default was always on the web? How might visitors use the building in a different way? But also then, how might curators think about what exhibitions they might put on if everything they were putting on show was already available on the website? So if everything's on the website, would curators think about how to exhibit things in a different way? What sort of exhibits would you need to design if showing it wasn't enough? And being a design collection as well, if you have a furniture in a Descartes collection, you're talking about chairs, and you can see photos of chairs anywhere, and you can probably see 3D scans of those chairs anywhere. What's different in the museum experience itself? Maybe visitors have to sit in the chair to realise how well it is actually designed, because it's comfortable to sit in, because they can see it anywhere else. So that sort of provocation to the curator. So if you haven't seen the pen, this is sort of the promo video thing for it. Big interactive tables spread throughout the museum, doing all the same things. Search by just drawing shapes, which was cool, so no interface for searching collections in the museum itself. And as you move around the museum, you were given a pen when you came in the door. Lucky that we had a transmission desk that you could do that at. And you got your pen, and every label could be touched and saved with a pen, and then you could use the other end of the pen to draw and create designs that, of course, were then saved to your account. They weren't just saved as images. You got the EPS file, or if you did the 3D shape, you actually got the 3D shape file as well. So it became a useful resource. So that pen was kind of designed from scratch. I could probably show the slide of the initial thing I was showing Tim and others yesterday. The original design of the pen in the slide that local projects did to pitch it to us was just like a stylus for your iPad, and of course making it isn't like that. Of course, we had a wallpaper collection as well, and in that same Fast Company article, Rick Grafe, who was the head of the American Graphics Association, was super critical of the museum's wallpaper collection because it never got shown. It was just these strips. How can you defend a wallpaper collection? Just de-accession it all, right? But then the wallpaper collection, of course, once you have the pen, becomes the signature piece of the museum. Really great where you can show the process of making wallpapers by drawing wallpapers, as well as having a pinch and zoom to browse a room where you are surrounded by the digitised wallpapers like this, the historic collection. That was kind of cool. But it was really about using the sense that if you've got the museum space, let's bring the objects that are otherwise dead to life again, in a way that you get a feeling, an emotional feel from them.
How many people have seen that?
And look, it was a huge social hit, and this has become like I think the most social media shared thing about the museum. And if you think back to 2011. The head of the Graphics Association in America is saying, why have you got this wallpaper collection? So, within 3 years, that's become the signature thing. And of course, this was all built on an API that we built in-house and all of that. And it was really also premised on this notion that the museum experience should be a networked, pervasive networked experience. Not just amongst visitors, but also amongst the screens within the building should also be connected to the internet, which for exhibit designers are like, oh my God, no, never do that. But of course you should, because it's 2018 now. Some other stuff we were doing there. So I also started doing acquisitions for the museum. So again, building these sort of new muscles for the museum. If you're designing a museum in the 21st century, obviously you should be acquiring software as design, and obviously you would start acquiring apps. So this is an app we acquired. It's one of the first apps on the iPad 1, and this was a music player. And we worked with the creators of this app, which was a beautiful data visualization music player that visualizes your music collection as planetary systems. So the sun is the artist. Our albums are the planets, and the moons are the tracks, and the orbit lengths are the lengths of the tracks, right? And the brightness of the sun is the amount of time you play that artist. So it's an interactive data visualization. Super great, super beautiful. Downloaded about 8 or 9 million times from the developers, and we acquired this as source code, right? Because it doesn't work on. It didn't even work on the iPads in 2014 when we acquired this. I think it broke in iOS 7. So we acquired the source code. We open source the source code with the developer's permission. But we also, when we acquired the piece, we acquired the GitHub repository. So future design scholars could go back through that source code and see the changes that the designers had made as a result of the medium they were working in changing. So it's a little bit like seeing a painter painting, but be able to peel back all the layers throughout the evolution of that painting and the development of a new pigment or ink. So it was the idea of the object you acquire has versions. But of course, for preservation reasons, you have to print out the source code on acid-free paper and stick it on a shelf, because what's the location, where does it sit in your collection management system? So it becomes a thing. So digital preservation, of course, is something I'm pretty interested in now. And people like, what did you actually acquire? And so one of the other things we did at Hewitt with the collection database was where we could, we made little ways to show the workings. So if you go to a collection record, I think you can type, if you add to the URL acquisition statement or something like that, you can actually see what the curators wrote about why we should acquire. things. And of course, planetary is the one that I wrote with Aaron Coe. And that's the sort of stuff that we wrote in the curatorial rationale for requiring the source code rather than just acquiring the final work. There was this notion that it would allow the work to be exhibited in the future, but also show the design principles on which it's based. And so it was a means to design, to get the sort of sense of the choices the designers made. And the notion that the iPad was the creative medium, that it was a new medium for making art or for making design works in. And when we started doing this, I then went and spoke in the UK about this and some other things. And this ceramicist, this British ceramicist, we just collected his 3D printed vase for the museum. The Descartes curators acquired that, and it looked like this. And that's Michael Egan, the ceramicist, who had started experimenting with 3D printing as a creative medium as a ceramicist. So it was a beautiful 3D printed vase. The Descartes curator had acquired a year before, and then Michael saw me talk, and he was like, "Well, Seb, you're acquiring source code. Well, why don't you acquire the source code for my vase too?" So we did, and the source code for his vase was like a Rhino file, so impossible to preserve in proprietary format. But what's interesting about this is you can now pull apart the vase, which of course is a limited edition, 1 of 7. So now the museum theoretically could print infinite copies of that vase. So it's an interesting ethical dilemma for the museum. But what is actually the object? Is it the vase or is it the source code? Is it the limited edition thing or the open access thing, really? But anyway, the sort of supplementary materials being collected as a way to explore design processes and technical processes. So anyway, there was that. So now I'm here at this other museum in Melbourne. Lots of museums. It's not a museum yet. So we say we're the National Museum of Film, TV, Video Games, Digital Culture and Art. We pretty successful, except we don't know really what we are. So we're in this place called Federation Square, which is in the middle of Melbourne. And people will say, I loved the David Bowie exhibition. I saw it at Federation Square. Well, I saw this great film kind of festival at Federation Square. And one of the things I was sharing with your management team was this, that when we do audience research, we have like 100% unintentional visitors. So we're not at the top of the hill like you guys are. So we're in the middle of the city, and so we survey people. We do a rolling survey each day, actually, called Visitor 360, which we do. I think it's about 10 exit surveys a day, so it builds up quite a good body of research. But 48% of visitors we survey, this is higher in the week when the tourists come, didn't intend to come. But they saw an exhibition because that's why they did the survey. And they had a really great time. But they didn't intend to come to the museum. So it's quite an interesting challenge. It's location, it's a huge brand challenge for us because the most asked question when people come to the building, well, what the hell do the letters stand for? And actually the second one is, moving image, what the hell is that? Which I think is a problem. So we're going through this rebrand thing. And this repositioning thing as a museum, this sort of notion of being a centre is a challenging one. So maybe I should stop there for a while. Maybe you should ask me some things.
I don't know what to ask you. I mean, I think one of the interesting things that you did at Hewitt was take to a conclusion a lot of the things that we talk about and approach.
Yeah.
You did get all of the collection on there.
Yeah.
And you were able then to play and manipulate the data in ways that most other museums only theorise about. And it's interesting what has happened with some of that stuff. It will be interesting, I think, to see how that plays out, because I think we all sort of want to know some of the answers to some of those questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's also it's important. It's probably important to say that when not only was very little of the collection available on the website when I started, it was almost entirely poorly documented. So the Cooper Hewitt has a huge amount of works on paper, and for the most part, those records were paper, comma, kind of known date, acquired in 1952, and that was it. And like a shelf reference. So it's a bit like your butterfly collection. It's this butterfly, but it's in this tray in this warehouse somewhere else, except when it's on exhibition. So without the imagery, it was really hard to know whether things were actually the right thing. Is this the right piece of paper? Like, does it look like 1952, or does it look like 1952? I don't know. So when the first thing we did was put the collection up online in a very scanned form, and this is a really good record because this one went out on show. And one of the things that Aaron, who was working for me, did really well was really push this notion of, because the records were so scarce, let's sentence-arize everything. So rather than say object description, just say what is this, and then put up that database field. But then down here you'll see it says this is a camera and case from the United States. Those were otherwise going to the type, location, or place of origin, the acquisition date, that sort of thing. So we just made those into sentences, and that was actually just a way of making the records feel bigger. But by doing that, we actually humanised it a huge amount, and it really changed the way the general public engaged.
And you could automate that too.
We automated it all. This is just a database record, but it doesn't feel like one. And I think it was that very early step that we did in like 2012. It was, Aaron started with me in July 2012, and by September 2012, this was all online. So it wasn't like, it was 3 to 4 months work to just get the whole collection up online. Not beautifully formatted or anything, but this was coming out of, so the collection management system is TMS. So if anyone who works with collection management, TMS, it's one of the first ones. It's kind of tough. And they had a product called, I think it was Museum, which dates it immediately to the 1990s. And its collection browser was the built-in sort of web browser thing that would work on like IE3 or something, but not on any one browser. But anyway, whatever, I digress. And it was really like looking at a database field. It was really dry. So we could make something really scrappy, and it be better than that.
It's interesting that you've moved to now a sort of film museum in a way.
Yeah.
And you won't be able to put most of that material online.
Yeah, look, none of that can go online, in fact. It's really quite challenging because of copyright. And also, we don't actually really have a collection. So the collection that we have is this state film archive, plus a bunch of video games, plus a bunch of art. And each of those have different record types. So we use Vernon, made here in New Zealand, and made in this city. Vernon's great, right? Mostly. We've done a bunch of stuff to make it work as an archival tool for the film collection. So films are interesting because they're like books, and so you have editions and mediums. So we might have Clueless on VHS and Clueless on DVD. Why do we have Clueless? Because up through to from the early 70s through to 1999, we had a lending collection. It was like your public library for video. So we just had like copies of Hollywood films, like 4 of them. We've been deaccessioning huge amounts of stuff. It's funny, we were talking about deaccessioning that. We deaccessioned like 30,000 VHS tapes last year. It was like, why not? Like, these are not rare things.
Yes. Well, they will be.
Strangely, yeah. So we've begun hoarding VHS players, in fact, because they're really hard to get now.
Laserdisc players, what you mean.
We don't have laserdisc, fortunately. We have some art that is on laserdisc, but anyway. But that sort of problem. So we have that collection that doesn't really have a huge amount of public value now in the age of Netflix. But we've done some work with our MIT students visualising the shape of that lending collection, which was pretty interesting. I can probably find a slide here somewhere of that, where we got the students to do some work around, this is supposed to be a fireplace, but I couldn't get it to work, so just have to pretend it's a pixel fireplace. It goes full screen on the wrong screen, but let me see if I can find this RMIT thing. So RMIT, you know, they're the, I guess, technical university.
Yeah, they're like AUT.
Yeah, they're super cool. They do great stuff, and their students, so their graphic kind of design students come in and they do these studio sessions where they spend 3 weeks working on a graphics project. So you have 70 students each making work, and they all come in and they do this thing where they visualise your data set in our case. Let me see if I can find it. Let's see what we've got. And what's really cool about that is they bring these completely different ways of thinking about stuff. Yeah, here you go. Here's a bunch of stuff. So this is them looking at the lending collection, or the former collection. So this is a gender breakdown of the films classified as craft and visual arts. So these are the craft and visual arts. So films about craft and visual arts, and films about female creatives, 53. Films about male creatives in the collection, 850. That's, you know, and
Do you want that?
yeah. You want that slide, right? Yeah, right. Great exhibition, right? Yeah. So, you know, even within museum collection, it's like, why is this the case? So now, you know, we didn't see this data, but we couldn't see that shape of the collection, nor could we see, you know, how we might do cinema posters. So this is all the films by year from Japan. This is all the films about the night sky, visualised. You know, it's kind of beautiful, right? So that's kind of cool. And of course, you know, we've been doing machine learning stuff across some of the older bits of the collection. So this is looking at computer vision browsers. So this is looking for vintage cars, what computers see as vintage cars in old historic footage. This is a very simple browser that was made in a couple of days in the team. And it's just a way of, you know, seeing what machines see in a collection. We haven't made this live because it's kind of boring, but horse, kind of like mammal, is different to horse. Like, what the hell? So that's kind of a weird thing. I think we have horse later on too. But it's interesting what machines see as things too. So we started thinking about, or we've been thinking for a long time about this notion of can machine kind of learning get that low level of cataloguing done for us and get humans to work on the harder bit, like selfie. So it makes you want to watch these films, right? Yeah. So that's the sort of notion that we have, is that maybe the machine kind of learning can be the interface that gets you to interesting bits of stuff. Because the other challenge with the film collection is not only is it hard because of copyright, it's hard because of time. Like, you come to the museum and you come to this place on the hill probably, and you've got, like, you've said I'm going to spend 3 hours in kind of the museum. And what happens when every work is like 2 hours long? You know, it's like, but you can't do it. So anyway, so we have that challenge there. So there's that. Yeah, so it's quite a different kind of vibe, I think, and it's interesting because I've also always worked with physical stuff. Yes. Both at Powerhouse and Hewitt and with other places too. And even when I was working on the state library in Queensland's stuff with their project called The Edge, there was a thing about, there was a materiality to it, and I think now it's not, and now, you know, the thing that we say, let me see if I can find the slide, is that whilst we're the National Museum of Film, TV, video games, we now also talk about it as this, that the big change is all of that stuff that we have as a museum is in people's pockets. And it's not because we put it in their pockets, it's because Netflix has, your PS4's got it, you know, YouTube's got it, you know, it's like, it's hard. So it changes that notion for us and the curators from the Cooper Hewitt proposition was, we have all this rare stuff, but we put it up on the web. Do we have all this very common stuff, and it is on the web anyway, and you watch it and play it more comfortably at home. So why come to the museum? And so that interpretation piece is absolutely critical.
What you showed us last night was the reason to come to the museum.
Yeah,
ACMI's doing a big redesign, and the plans look pretty extraordinary, actually.
So we
You
have,
can't show it.
no, we have, this is what we do in broad strokes, is that, we're spread over four floors and two entrances, one down here at the street and one at the square. And so, similar to you, we have that problem of flow, and we're trying to re-curate a set of permanent galleries that tell a story. The permanent galleries were designed in 2007 and 8, and then launched in 2009. The concept design was done before the iPhone launched. And so, I was showing my kids, like 2 weekends ago in fact, Steve Jobs' presentation. He launches the iPhone 1 Apple thing. They do it shit. Anyway, you know what I mean. So it's very early in the morning for me. I'm a morning person. So Jobs is doing this. It's worth looking on YouTube for it. But Jobs is explaining what pinch and zoom would actually do to a room of technology journalists who are stunned. And it's like, you think about your own kids now, or your friends' kids, and you're like, what the hell? Like, that's only 10 years ago.
It's a nightmare. We had to change all the screens.
Yeah, right? And then people were like, what? So, it's amazing to see how much things have changed in the world of interfaces and the expectations people have around screens. So we have a permanent gallery that is very popular and very successful, gets, 750,000 visitors through. But it's designed and conceived before the iPhone was even announced, right? So that's sort of like probably the worst time to have ever launched a gallery.
Called Screen World.
Called Screen
Sort of
World.
see that.
Yeah, it's like this, when it opened, had 250 screens in 1,200 square metres.
Yeah.
Like that density of screens. And then when you add the screens in visitors' pockets, when they come through this, it's like crazy. There's more screens in people's pockets than like on a Saturday. There's like 2,500 screens in this exhibition, plus all the screens that we put. So anyway, there's that problem. And so, the sort of vertical piece is important to us. So we're doing new permanent galleries, new education centre, an audience lab. So we run a co-working space and accelerator as well that sits alongside the staff. Staff work amongst businesses, arts businesses. And so we're creating an audience lab for user testing on the museum floor, which would be really great. So it's the people making contemporary media art, video games, VR experiences, films, whatever, can use the museum to test their stuff before it goes public, which we think is really great for them. It's also great for our audiences because it shows process. It allows our audience to speak to an artist who's making a 4-screen video piece, or a VR maker who's trying to figure out how to make something more exciting for 7-year-old kids. And the kids are like, that's really boring. And the kids learning about how hard it is to make VR experiences that are interesting, because the maker's like, oh, I spent like two years on this, and it's like, yeah, it's really shit. Like, that's what happened. It's kind of interesting. And the digital preservation lab, and obviously there'll be not a Cooper Hewitt pen, but obviously we're thinking a lot about and working a lot around this notion of if everything is in your pocket, what is the technology experience in the museum that doesn't let you? So the Cooper Hewitt pen, if you boil it down, is basically a bookmarking tool. Does anyone actually do that anymore on their web browser? Bookmark things? No one does now, but anyway. Bookmarking, if you're old enough to remember that, on the web. really the pen was a way of bookmarking the museum's website as you moved through physical
It's
space.
a hot company that did that, didn't there? What was it
Yeah,
called?
right. There were a few.
Yes.
Anyway. Yahoo bought them out.
They shut it down.
They shut it down.
Yeah.
Like they did everything. Anyway, we don't. So the pen was a way of bookmarking the museum's website as you move through physical space. So maybe for us the challenge is bookmarking the internet as you move through the museum. So if I see a film in the cinema, is it added to my Netflix queue when I walk out of the building? Or would my Netflix recommendations improve because it knows I've seen that film in the cinema? So maybe it's that, maybe it's not. But it's that sort of idea that really it should be something like that, because we can't put it up on our website. So we're sort of doing this thing going beyond the traditional film, game and media museum, and also because we're the National Museum of Things. Can we tell different stories about and with things that aren't the stories you can get in a YouTube supercut or video essay? Like, what are the stories that are different that the museum can tell? What about the video games that you don't know about, rather than the video games you do know about? But we need hooks as well. So, making sense of all the normal stuff about what we should be doing in museums anyway. But there'll be physical things like those things, and those that like have shrunk to your phone now. And this new focus, I guess, on process. So one of the things the museum doesn't do at the moment is that illumination of process. But the big change, of course, is first you democratise the means of making in the 60s with handheld video, and then that became a big thing in the 80s with VHS cameras and stuff like that. Then distribution was democratised with the web and piracy and other things. Piracy and points, because distribution really, consumption's been enormously democratised, but also remaking and remixing now has too. So that sense of the tools of making and remaking, fan cultures, and all of that is very much what the museum needs to lead into. And the museum becomes a platform for content that can change. Particularly, we have a permanent gallery now that hasn't really had the flexibility to change in a decade. Maybe you can see in this and see. So in this image, you might see these labels. These labels are on metal spikes and printed on metal. So you can imagine how we don't change anything in there, because it's really hard to change. So we're trying not to do that, because we know that the new museum has to be able to change stuff.
Great idea to screen it.
I know, right? Like screens are good, and we have so many screens and stuff, but not for anyway. So experiential art, these are some things that we've had on, like clock and the Aitken, etc. Rio Gidacada. And we know that video games and stuff are becoming awesome, which is video game, which is the film, that sort of stuff. So the design principles, the sort of whole of building experience, performative spaces, what's distinctly us? So we're doing a lot of journey mapping and these sorts of things. And for us, again, that thing about time, that most of the things that we have, how do you show Assassin's Creed in a museum? Like, it's a game that's probably going to take you 25 hours to play the main quest. Like, what do you do? It's really hard to control. It's like, how do you even deal with that? Let alone talk about films. Like, we can do something about Star Wars and visitors know more about it than us. But if we choose an Iranian director, how do we get a 10-year-old kid to even start to watch that? Like, it's really challenging. So there's a lot of that sort of stuff, assumed knowledge. I guess it's very similar to contemporary art, but contemporary art's all becoming experiential now anyway. So the team lab thing being built with Maury is digital play. So the audience lab, so this is a very early piece of research we did with RMIT again around what an audience lab might do. So it won't be actually this, but this was the original notion, was it would be a room which would allow us to suck kind of the brains of the curators there and visitors, pilot VR experiences, do usability stuff, as well as living room of the future kind of things. And people do research around it. So we're doing this, but it'll be a much more portable thing, which I think will be pretty cool. So yeah, lots of cool stuff. Oh, and a timetable that's really short too. So we'll close in March and open in December. Digital preservation.
How do we do that? Do people have questions? You can ask pretty much anything.
Yeah, totally.
I'm interested in your comments concerning video games. How much are they tied to specific hardwares, and how much is that part of the preservation?
Yeah, so we did a research council project on video games in the 1980s, made in Australia and New Zealand. I'll just bring up something around that. And it's really interesting. I think the notion of what preserving video games is, what that means, has quite radically changed now too. Indeed, we're actually holding a summit on July 28th at our digital preservation with some stuff around that. And I guess when here's some Powerhouse stuff. All right, so when I started the Powerhouse, so I have a parallel life in electronic music, right? So this is the Powerhouse before. So you won't see this image in the future, because they're about to pull it down. Anyway, Tim and I are very sad about that.
Very sad about that.
Anyway. The Tim was actually there when they put the planes in, right?
Put the plane.
He put the plane in, there you go, right? So, crazy, right? So the Powerhouse, I'll get to, so video games, mate, there is a link, right? So I have a parallel life in electronic music, and the Powerhouse had an amazing collection of synthesizers, like really amazing collection. These are ones from the Powerhouse collection. And Australia, of course, made some amazing synths, right? So this is the Fairlight. And these are from the museum's collection catalogue, right? These were never allowed to be played or turned on. And yet there was a violin in the museum's collection that had to be played every couple of years as part of its conservation strategy.
Play the pianos.
The pianos, yeah, right. And those were hundreds of years older than this stuff. And you could never hear these ever again. Like, it kind of was terrible. And that really gave me the shits, really. And, you know, I guess around the time I was at the Powerhouse, people were preserving video games, right? So this is the original Pac-Man PCB, kind of cool, right? And to preserve this in the past, you would kind of collect this, and it would be a bunch of metal and transistors that would sit in a shed, degrading. And yet people wanted that. And, in 1997, so I got really interested in how this might change. And in 1997, MAME launched. So MAME is an emulator, and the first version of MAME in 1997, it's now 20 years old, only ran 5 games. So what people used to do was get a reader that would take the chips off here and read the data from them, and then run them in an emulator that would reproduce the exact same game from the original code from the original boards. And this first version ran 5 titles, which all ran off the same circuits, right? But that's when you were making video games in the very early 80s and late 70s, people would reuse the chipsets. That's all. So 20 years on, from 1997. So I've got slides for all these things. So MAME became massive. And MAME now runs 30,000 different systems. It's actually merged with a thing called MES. And so this is the number of platforms that MAME will emulate now. So emulation to play the thing again is a viable means of preserving stuff, as long as you can extract the original code, right? Not even the source code, but the compiled code. And now, of course, the amazing thing about JavaScript is you can now do this in your web browser. So the Internet Archive, Jason Scott and many others have been sucking up all these ROMs and running them in JavaScript with MES and MAME emulated in your web browser. So Outrun, this game that was sort of, when I was a young teenager, was a thing in the sit-down cabinet, you know. You probably, if you're old like me, you probably remember playing this, and it was like $2 a game, right? And this got ported to different platforms. You can get it on your, PS4 Classics or whatever. Runs an emulator to run this as well. But a bit like Star Wars as well, when gamer companies bring these into the future, they change them. So like the Han Solo thing, who shot first, and Lucas, when he releases another bloody film, he re-edits the old ones. Game companies with their IP also often do that. So if you want to play the original thing, getting the original rights is important. But of course, this isn't the experience of playing that game. So what we're interested in, what we were doing with the 80s stuff from Australia and New Zealand, is talking to players, talking to makers, and recording their experiences. So the oral histories of the culture of playing these things. What did it mean? It wasn't the game, it was that it ate all your coins, and you had a limited amount of plays. And video games have changed in such a massive way now too. I mean, every video game I buy now, I finish. Like in the 80s and 90s, you never finished video games. The point was you didn't finish them. And now, like, if I put my kids in front of like any of the games that I grew up with, they are like stumped by like, this is really boring because it's so hard. And it's like they are hard because the commercial model for them was to take all the money out of your piggy bank and to put it into their machines. And you have a sense also of the feeling of the game too. So in game kind of studies, there's a big discussion around how to describe games. So video games, is it about the narrative? What about video games that aren't narrativist? What about video games that don't conform to being game-like? So-called walking simulators. So this sort of thing of telling a story without competition or challenge. So those are really interesting games too. And so how do we talk about them? But then there's also another path which is about how does a game feel, and how does it feel to play. So we're doing a lot of thinking about that. And of course, the emulators now that are running your browser are pretty amazing. So the Internet Archive has also been archiving computer viruses. So these are early DOS viruses that you can now run in your browser on a virtual machine to get a sense of what it was like to get infected. So the sort of software experiences are becoming artifacts as well. And I think that's sort of the thing about what does preservation now mean. It's preserving the stories and that sort of feeling, that experiential feeling. Missile Command Story, yeah. So Tim is actually like the Australian Missile Command champion.
Because I put too many coins in the machine when I was in Melbourne. So they put the exhibition on at ACMI, and you could play the game. So I rolled in on sort of day 10 and played the game and got the high score, and it lasted the whole run. And the kids couldn't believe it.
Yeah. And trackball.
Because I knew how to roll that trackball like no one else. Yeah.
Kids are like, what? It's an upside down mouse. I don't even do that. Where's the touch? Anyway, so that's the sort of thing I think with game preservation goes a lot to what performing arts preservation is too. That, when you preserve, what does preserving a theatre piece look like? What is preserving music feel like? It's probably performance. And in that vein, we've done a little bit of stuff around that. So one of the art commissions that we did was work with Sam Pitt and Google Creative Lab in Sydney. So they did a immersive theatre production where two people got into a ghost costume in Adelaide, and the performers performed a play around you. And it was a story of 3 moments in a life of a couple. And the ghost costume had a headset in it that had motion tracking, and when you looked at a performer, you heard their thoughts, as well as their dialogue. Their dialogue was being spoken, but you heard their thoughts, right?
Got their backstory.
Their back story. And so we were talking with them and I was like, well, could we use virtual reality to preserve that performance? So we use VR to capture that performance, but of course then the recording of the performance becomes a performance as well. And of course virtual reality is really hard to preserve, so like we have a more stable version of one performance recorded, but it's still interactive, and you can put the VR head set on, you step into one of the characters, and again, because of the VR, you can hear what they think, but you're hearing a recording of a performance with interactivity. So that we're kind of playing in that sort of space too. So sort of what is the artifact? Is the artifact experience? And I think there's a lot of stuff with first kind of presentation.
I think it's a completely new experience.
It is a new experience, like, but there's lots of deeply rooted paths in this that go before digital preservation. This is how stories get shared.
And for all of us, it's increasingly going to be the way we collect them.
Yeah.
So,
No matter what, because that chair that you collect in the decorative arts space is like, who owned that chair? And then you want to know how did they feel this thing? Maybe they lost a leg in the war and it wasn't a comfortable chair after that.
and the notion of collecting archives with people.
Yeah.
You know, now when an artist dies, you can collect their archive and you get a studio full of drawings, and maybe not now, but 10, 20 years ago you got a lot of drawings and pens and stuff.
Yeah.
Now you might just got your computer sitting on a desk.
Yeah. So the New York Public Library, when I was living in New York, acquired Timothy Leary's laptops into their collection as part of the archive, and by doing data forensics on the drives, they found he'd written these 2 video games he'd never told anyone about, and they unearthed those. And so now you can log into a virtual machine that accesses his hard drives to break. It's like crazy. Anyway.
Privacy breach.
Yeah, but also kind of cool, right? But they were never published. So should you
Even worse.
So your IT department can do this in any case, right? So but just around that, also I think there are other institutions springing up. So in Melbourne, I'm really pleased that Fairlight synthesizer. So MESS is a synthesizer museum in Melbourne that's been set up as a not-for-profit because 2 of the people who founded MESS had these great synthesizer collections, and they knew other people with them. But they were also musicians, and they wanted people to play them. So you can now go to MESS, you join, it's a not-for-profit, and it's like a synthesizer library. You go in there and you can play things, and you can take in your digital workstation and record from them as well.
Or your real.
Or your reel if you Tim has a fetish for analog recording here. So this sort of not-for-profit is starting to colonise the spaces that museums used to colonise, I think, and they're actually providing what people actually want, which is they want to use the thing. And so your membership fee for MESS gets you into MESS and sessions there, but also pays the salary of people to fix the machines as they get used. And they have an enormous collection of synthesizers now, and every touring artist to Melbourne comes and books time there now. It's become amazing, and Melbourne Museum had an amazing synthesizer collection, like Powerhouse did too. Never get used, and so this collection, the original 2 guys who set this up, were thinking about donating their collection of synths to the museum, but then went, well, that's going to kill them. So let's not do that.
Yeah.
So there's interesting stuff going on in this space around different types of conservation, or preservation for use rather than preservation for preservation.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because we could make them available.
Yeah,
and people use them and eventually they break, but they're still going to be the same.
And you do this with Maori and Pacifica stuff. I mean, you repatriate first kind of nations collections back into communities, and communities own those collections. This is just sort of a different version of that, right? So anyway, I think there's something around video game, about digital preservation, which might be about keeping it in community and creating records and links between the stuff in use. And anyway, so maybe that answers it.
Could I, if I
Sure.
could continue on that, so what about the knowledge of how to repair those?
Yeah, so maybe the museums become the knowledge repositories of service manuals. No, I don't know. I mean, this is actually the thing. It's like, but then
Not only the printed information in the head of somebody who has experience.
Yeah,
fix
the oral
stuff.
history on
the
how
whole
to
history.
fix that.
But we do this when we keep things when we repatriate things back into communities. The communities are responsible for the knowledge sharing of how to use that artefact for ceremonial use or community use. This would be the same with a synthesizer or a video game or a piece of furniture or whatever, but it would change that notion of the object being static once it comes into the museum and thus dead. Everything becomes used and usable. But yeah, but I think we've got a lot we can learn from how First Nations think about repatriating objects.
My mind's just running wild on the sort of notion of collecting and the time period in which Western culture started collecting and what they were collecting.
Yeah.
And what we're collecting now is completely different.
Yeah.
And it has all these different. Well, I can't solve it quickly.
No.
I suppose, I was just thinking, I suppose what we collect is the form of something, but when it comes to design objects, the whole point of design objects is about the function and the form, but we disable the function or people's access to the function when we are thinking around preserving the form.
We put them in stasis the second they come in.
But maybe we don't need to anymore.
Yeah, maybe no,
Oh, we collect 2 or 5.
I mean, this is an artwork that we have in our collection from 2004. This doesn't run anymore. We just spent a whole lot of time trying to get this running. And it's only like 15 years old. And the problem with it was when 2000 driver wasn't available. It's insane.
Questions? Other questions? Pete?
I'm just wondering a little bit, going back to your planetary program.
Yeah.
And the fact that you archived it on acid-free paper.
We also chose a typeface that was made in 1968.
Great.
OCR in 1968. And we chose that because the computer systems of the future with climate change might reduce computing capacity to that of the 60s. So if you preserved it on paper, could you use the computing power of the 60s to reinterpret?
Right. So it's kind of related to that, as I have this concept of software archaeology, and there's a lot of platform studies and software studies and all these sorts of things. What I'm really sort of trying to understand is to what extent, because these things get lost, right? A major operating system which is publicly
used in hundreds of millions
is now dead, and what we also lose from that in these millions of lines of code that's happening is we also lose the socio-political connections in terms of the early development and production of that. And I think back, I've just been reading recently about Logo, which was an early, and that software tells us a lot about our education process. It tells us a lot about who we are today, and there's not many people that take it as a responsibility or have a mandate to try and tell those narratives. And I know it's really hard. I know
we've struggled with. So Planetary went out on show when the computer opened, and we wanted to have it running with the code running beside it, but it ran too fast for that.
Right.
And it didn't make any sense. So I think part of what we were thinking about then, and what we still think about also with video games and other stuff now, is we don't have ways of exhibiting. We don't do exhibitions about software archaeology because we don't know how to exhibit that.
Yeah.
We don't know how to tell those stories, and unfortunately, a lot of the artifacts that we've collected aren't the right artifacts to help us with those stories. So I think it's a challenge for exhibition designers to come up with a way of exhibiting those things. There's some great books about this stuff. There's some great stuff from many writers about exactly the things that we're talking about.
Have you got some titles you can...
So the platform studies, there's racing under the beam, which is about the Atari 2600, which is about how they made things work in such a small amount of RAM, but also that it was about the beam that's being shot across the cathode ray tube and the speed of the processor. Now, when you run that on a new television, it doesn't do that anymore because the mechanics don't work like that. Or the Commodore 64 one, which is one.
Because you were playing with the refresh time.
Yeah, totally, like all that stuff. So there's some technology affordances there. It's showing that and explaining that to like even 30-year-olds, like impossible. Like it's really, really hard.
So they don't know how cathode ray tube works.
Yeah, and then you were science museum, and then like it's all too hard. But I think for museums, it's about trying to collect the right things in ways that give that flexibility to do that in the future. We wanted to collect the source code because we knew it would be some of the comments that the designers had made are written in the source code. Yeah. Well, this is really hard. Like this is sort of a kludge because of iOS, 7, 5 at that time. Other thing though that's interesting is the makers have now got this running in emulation. So iOS, the early versions of iOS are now beginning to be emulatable, and you will be able to run the first apps probably in your browser on the Internet Archive within the next 5 or 6 years. So you better be collecting these things. Where are the New Zealand apps? The Auckland-made apps? They're probably disappearing on people's hard drives.
But part of the difficulty is also, while I'm a great fan of emulation, part of the difficulty, and you were talking about it, is that the old McLuhan phrase comes up, the messages needed.
Yeah.
And so it's not the same. And I guess the difficulty is this. It sounds very nuanced to a lot of people, and that's part of the problem with what we're losing from that.
So capturing that is part of the collecting process, I think. But we'll run out of time.
I just want to say a huge thanks to Sid. He's been here all week working with various teams, and the knowledge and insights has been invaluable to us all. So we just need to pronounce this Australian switch.
Oh, actually, New Zealand. It's brought the north, so yeah.
Good. Thank you, Sid. We'll just have a pack up some chairs real quickly as well. Just the stacks of 4 and 5. All right.